Welcome to the lab. My name's Corey, and in this video, we're going to build a cemetery gate. If you watched last week's video, you already know what this video is going to be about. Last week, I set myself the task of putting together and learning how to use a bunch of pillar templates in order to carve really cool structured pillars out of foam with my hot wire cutter. And I knew I had to use some of those pillars in order to build a gate for all the cemetery graveyard terrain that I've been making so far. And so this piece here will conclude the outside perimeter portion of that build for the most part. There's not much more to say about it. I basically got all my creative ideas out in my last video. If you want to know them, go ahead and watch it. It's more of a hangout session where we kind of chill and do a bunch of hobbying together as I explain my process and where my ideas are coming from and stuff. So without further ado, here's how I made this thing. Oh, and I actually learned something new while doing this. I tried out a whole double-sided sticky tape thing in order to be able to make the centerpiece, and I'll explain that in the next section. Alright, so here we have the graveyard. All I did was reset it up. You can't really see it from the top-down view. I should have put it over my shoulder or something. But here I am testing the different sizes of pillars to see what I thought looked right next to the cemetery. I was tempted to go with a more realistic look with the medium-sized pillars, and having not had gone through the whole process of testing them all out last week or 2 weeks ago, I probably would have. But there's just something so much more exciting and cool looking about the large, huge pillars for the gate that I decided to go with those, as you see them here. I had that little wizard dude out in order to compare the different sizes. So I took those out and I grabbed some cocktail sticks that I got off Amazon. Got a couple hundred of them. I used them for the walls, as you saw in that video, maybe or maybe not. And I knew immediately that I would have to weight these down, just like I did everything else. Foam is light, and while you can make a lot of stuff out of it, if you're trying to play a war game and you end up sneezing or coughing or, I don't know, turning on a fan, all that terrain's going to go everywhere if they're small pieces. So I took this cheap box that I use for nuts and bolts for weights, and I made an outline for where the bolt was going to go, and I took some of my carving tools and I just outlined the hole and dug in, and then I kept trying to fit the bolt in there to make sure that it fit nicely and that I could push it in far enough that it wasn't going to stick out of the bottom and cause the pillar to be lopsided. And you just have to go back and forth a couple times and you'll get it out. And then I used my hot glue gun, poured in a bunch of hot glue, shoved in the bolt, and there you have it. The bolt probably would have stayed in by itself, but the hot glue really just seals it in there just in case. And then here is that trick I was talking about. This is so good. I'm so glad I did this. It saved so much time, and I think it really made a huge difference in how the gate turned out and looked by the end of it. You can see when I was setting up the cemetery to begin with, I counted the squares on my mat to see how large I needed to make the gate, and it turned out to be an even number. I think it was 7 inches total. And then I took that away from the base of the pillars, and then I knew how wide I had to make the gate, which I think is like 5 inches, as you see. And then I lined up, I figured out the distance in between each to make it look even, and then I knew the middle bit would have to be a double to make it look like it was 2 doors that swung shut. And unfortunately, the only way I could make this structurally sound, so it wasn't going to flop all over the place, because I did not plan on placing this on a base, I did not want this on a base, was that I had to seal the middle. And here you can see me clipping away some of the extra super glue that I put in there that combined near the top. I wanted as much of the middle bits separated from each other as I could. Here you see me just testing out where I want these to stick into the pillar. But yeah, I wanted them as separate as possible so they would look like separate doors. And a little bit later, I didn't get a recording of it because it happened so quick. I actually took a bit of black paint and painted a line in between the two middle bits in order to make it look visually separated as well from a distance. Don't know how well it stands out, but I think it actually did a pretty good job of not blending together to look like one big welded piece. And you can see there, all I did was take the super glue and I dabbed it on each different section, lined up exactly where I wanted it to be, and then I placed the skewer down. Had a little bit of accelerant spillage, but yeah. And then you'll see here in a second, you can see it's stuck pretty well to that double-sided tape, but not incredibly so. So a trick here is definitely wait for all the super glue to set and then pull on pieces that are on the bottom, so you're not pulling away from the other pieces. You don't want them to separate as you pull it off the glue. You want them all to come off in one big chunk. And then I lined up roughly, I kind of eyeballed it where these were supposed to stick into the pillars, try to get it as close to the middle of the pillar as possible. I poked some holes with the pointy bits, and you'll see I also attached 2 extra bits to the top and bottom of those side pieces that are supposed to look like hinges, so that they would have 4 points of contact into the pillar so that the gate wouldn't warp as much. I made sure they fit on both sides, and then after this, I test fitted them together just to make sure that they worked right and it didn't look lopsided, and I eyeballed it, and it didn't have to be super precise. As far as my eye can tell, it's fairly level. It may not be exactly level, but you know what, that's fine. Then I took that apart because it was only a dry fit, and I textured the pillars. They're supposed to look old and worn down, so I needed to put in some pits and grooves, that's for sure. Just use the old aluminum foil ball on foam trick. And then I heated up my hot glue again, and my hair's in the way, as always. But you can see on the 4 points, I put dabs of hot glue. I accidentally had to take one off. You'll see me picking at my fingers there. And then, just like the bolts, I shoved it in. And then that was that. I used the X-Acto knife to clean up some of the excess hot glue that spilled out so that it didn't look horrible. And so far, as much as I've lifted these and set them down on one pillar or the other, they have not come apart. You see me adding more texture and damage here. I actually chipped off a couple of corners and scratched in a bunch of cracks. And then here, I wanted to make sure that it looked like something was keeping the gate closed, so I took some necklace chain that I had, and I wrapped it around the middle bars, and then I set them with super glue so they weren't dangling. I wanted them one solid stiff piece so that they wouldn't just come off and that the paint would set. Then I used the black Mod Podge there, Mod Podge with black paint, on all the foam bits to toughen them up a little bit. I was careful in not getting them on the gate portion, on the cocktail sticks. That way it didn't look like random goop. Then I used my Vallejo airbrush primer and primed it. I've been staying away from rattle can. I know it's quicker, especially if you're doing batches of things, but I don't think it's a ton quicker. I mean, obviously it gets more surface area, so yes, if you've got something big or if you've got a huge batch of terrain, fine, rattle can. But honestly, I think the airbrush paint is just so much cheaper, and I had a lot of plastic on there that I really wanted to make sure would seal up, so I wanted to make sure I had some good primer on it. Then I used my basic stone paint job, dark gray on the bottom of the pillar, just a normal light gray, heavy dry brush on everything. You can see where I chipped away corners to make it look damaged, like it's falling apart. Already, just that first dry brushing brings out so much of that texture that we added in. And then a final light dry brushing of vanilla all over the pillars. I did the pillars first because I knew there was going to be a lot of oversplash onto the metal, what was supposed to be metal bits. And you can see there on the right all of the white paint, and I've already covered it up there on the left with the metal paint. I knew the metal paint would cover it right up, no problem. I'm using here scale 75, I think it's black metal, and I even covered the chain with it. And then I'm taking a black wash, because that's what I used on the rest of the stuff, and just covering a bunch of the pillar. I accidentally actually put on too much, but that's fine. You can wick it off as it settles. You'll see where it looks like way too much sometimes, and you just clean off your brush, dry it off a little bit, and you put it in that little area to wick off as much as you can. And then here I use a smaller brush to dab on some of the wash in areas that I thought would make sense, all over the chain, splash it here and there all over the long parts, and I made sure to hit all of the connection joints on the back. And then I gave the pillars another white dry brush, and then I gave the gate itself a dry brushing of a light silvery metallic to bring out some edges. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look into how I made this thing. This was pretty simple to put together. It was pretty straightforward. All of the ideas that I had in my head came out really easily into the build. That doesn't always happen. A lot of the times I'm going to be struggling and I break something or it just doesn't work out right. And in this, it felt like a puzzle that just kind of slid into place as I went. The real big takeaway is to use double-sided sticky tape or something that can hold whatever you're gluing together down. I would not have been able to build this gate as easily and as symmetrical and right-angled as I did here without the use of that tape. I don't know why I had that idea. I think I was thinking about how I used the tape. John Yenis, if you go watch Ninjon over on his channel, he talks about using the double-sided sticky tape in order to hold his minis. And I got to thinking about that and how, like, no matter how much you shake them, they stay. And I've always had problems gluing things together. So I figured it would work for building things as well as painting them. So, and you know what? It did. It was really good. I highly recommend it if you ever need to build yourself like some bars or a ladder, or I don't know. I'm probably going to use that trick for a few other things that I can't think of right now. Really helpful. Get some double-sided tape of some kind. I've got the 3M foam stuff. That's the big takeaway that I'm really excited about for this video that I tried and worked just amazingly. I think it cut the time of this build down so much. This build maybe only took me a couple hours. Cut out the pillars, build the gate, put it together, paint it. Like, this took almost no time at all. It was really way more simple than I thought it would be. So without that trick, though, I think I would have struggled trying to get these lined up for who knows how long. I might have gotten very frustrated with this, but I didn't. So, you know, if you have any other ideas for graveyard stuff, or if you have any other tips and tricks like that double-sided sticky tape that not everybody uses or that you came up with, I would love to hear them in the comments below. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you want to stick around and see my next videos or even my past videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. And until next time, experiment, with your hobby.
Very nice people, some very, very, very nice people. Once you meet the nicest people in your